Mo Rocca starts us off this morning with a trip back in time to America's revolutionary past.
The Allied ring is relentlessly tightening around the right.
Newsreels tell the story of World War II. The early still photography of Matthew Brady chronicles the horrors of the Civil War. But with the American Revolution, which began 250 years ago this month, it can be harder to appreciate the life and death stakes in the colonists' fight for freedom. What did it feel like in Lexington and Concord, the two Massachusetts towns, where one April day in 1775, the Patriots and British Redcoats first exchanged fire?
Do you all think a lot about what the mood was like early that morning on April 19th?
We discuss it a lot. We read accounts, we read diaries.
Larissa Saskin, William Rose, and John Nichols are members of the Lexington Minutemen Reenactors group.
Can you understand how upset they were?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
It's impossible for me, as someone who was born in the 80s, to ever imagine what it had been like to have my freedoms taken as much as theirs were. To be pushed into that proverbial corner where my only choice is to fight the world's best army.
When we think about the revolution, most people, they start with, the taxes, the Stamp Act, the Townsend duties, back in the 1760s. By the time you get to 1775, it's a whole different ballgame.
By that point, the mother country and her Massachusetts colony were beyond estranged, says Jim Hollister, a park ranger at Minuteman National Historical Park. Parliament had imposed onerous taxes without representation, sent thousands of British troops to occupy Boston, and, most egregiously, had stripped Massachusetts of the power to govern itself, power it had enjoyed for nearly a century.
What gets somebody, living a comfortable life to then take the most dramatic action?
Do they feel humiliated?
Absolutely. Humiliated and threatened.
On April 18, 1775, 700 British soldiers began marching 18 miles through the night from Boston to Concord to seize arms that had been stockpiled by Patriot militiamen.
There's not supposed to be a Massachusetts army. That is treason.
Punishable by...
by death, really.
So they're really taking a risk.
They are taking a huge risk.
About halfway between Boston and Concord, the town of Lexington, which happened to be where two future founding fathers, Sam Adams and John Hancock, were lying low. Hancock was one of the wealthiest men in the colonies and a major financier of the Patriot cause. Adams had helped plan the Boston Tea Party.
Paul Revere rides into town at about what time?
He gets here at about 11:30 p.m.
Yes, Paul Revere, who famously sounded the alarm about the approaching Redcoats.
John Hancock, Sam Adams, and Paul Revere were standing right here. A chill runs up your spine.
According to the Lexington History Museum's Sarah McDonough, Revere made a special stop here to urge Adams and Hancock to flee.
John was very hesitant to leave. There are men outside who are going to fight the might of the British Empire. He wants to be a part of that. He sees himself as a leader, and he very much was. Sam Adams was said to have sort of placed his hand on John's shoulder and said, "We don't belong here."
The two leaders escaped under cover of darkness as 77 brave Patriot militiamen stood guns drawn at sunrise on April 19th as the world's most vaunted army approached. It's not known who fired the first shot, but one thing is clear.
It does not go well for the Patriots with this first battle.
No, not at all.
The colonists scattered, 8 of them killed, a terrible toll for this tight-knit community.
All of these people were intimately connected, which makes the wave of grief that much worse because everyone lost someone.
Now word is radiating. They've killed our people in Lexington. So the militiamen that are turning out, after that are infuriated.
Jim Hollister showed us where those Minutemen, called so because they were ready at a moment's notice, gathered later that morning.
And they're up on the top of that hill. There's over 400 of them.
To take on the Redcoats as they arrived at Concord's North Bridge.
Then a shot rings out from the British side by all accounts, and then a second and a third. And one of the Minutemen is grazed in the forehead, and then Major Buttrick gives the fateful order, fire, for God's sake, fire. And that was the first time that a colonial officer ordered his Minutemen to fire on the King's soldiers. Once the Minutemen open fire, the casualties in the British are very heavy, and they just break and they run.
There's no turning back.
There's no turning back. And for the Minutemen, imagine seeing the backs of British soldiers running from you.
Throughout their grueling 18-mile retreat, the Redcoats took fire from a growing number of colonial militiamen fighting from behind rocks and trees. This was terrain the Patriots knew well. It was now the British suffering humiliation. By the time their day ended in Boston, more than 70 of them were dead and hundreds more injured.
What changed that day?
The idea that the crisis could be settled peacefully, the idea that they were going to be able to return to their normal lives. The world that they knew was gone.
The following month, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. There, delegates, including John Hancock and Sam Adams, appointed George Washington the commander of the newly formed Continental Army. The Revolutionary War had begun. And for reenactor William Rose, himself a military veteran, the story of that fateful April day will always be worth retelling.
Bring those guns up.
Maybe no one will remember me 50 years from now, but if some kid remembers me because I gave him a great story that he can relate to. Think about the immigrants, 1607 Jamestown, or 1620 Plymouth, or 20 minutes ago in the southern border or anyplace else. They're coming here for a reason, for the ability to not have somebody else having a boot on your neck. If we can get rid of all the nonsense, the red and the blue and the value judgments, and just look at that reason, that's what America stands for. And if I can convince one little kid that this is the place to keep striving for that, then that kid can be us dressed up in another 50 years.